hoping that with every single step you could be blown into pieces too small for your mother to recognize? What if the only thing standing between you and certain death was a pocket watch and a strange rhythm your grandfather taught you when you were 7 years old? Tonight, I'm going to tell you the true story of a man who did exactly that. A Cherokee scout who walked into a minefield that had already claimed 11 American lives and walked out again after finding 40 German mines buried beneath the French soil. He did not trigger a single one. And the method he used? The United States Army still cannot fully explain it. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from. I want to know which state, which country, which corner of this world is listening to this story tonight. And if you have not subscribed yet, please hit that button. This channel survives because of people like you who help us share these hidden stories that the history books forgot. We need your support to keep bringing you the truth that others want to bury. Now let me take you back to a cold morning in November of 1944. The village was called Saint-Avold, a small cluster of stone buildings in the Moselle region of northeastern France, just 23 kilometers from the German border. By the time the American forces arrived, the village had changed hands 3 times. First the French held it, then the Germans took it in 1940. Then the Americans pushed through in September of 44, only to lose it again during a fierce counterattack in October. Now, in the bitter cold of November, they were trying to take it back for good. The problem was the field. Between the American position and the village lay approximately 800 meters of open farmland. The soil was dark and wet from weeks of autumn rain. The grass had been trampled flat by artillery fire. And somewhere beneath that innocent-looking earth, the Germans had buried enough explosives to kill every man in the approaching battalion. They called them shrapnel mine or S-mines, but the American soldiers had their own name for them, bouncing Bettys. The design was simple and horrifying. When triggered, a small charge would launch the mine approximately 1 meter into the air. Then the main charge would detonate, sending 360 steel balls in every direction at lethal velocity. A single mine could kill or maim every soldier within a 25-meter radius. The Germans had reportedly buried dozens of them in the field outside Saint-Avold. The first attempt to cross had been a disaster. On the morning of November 9th, a squad of 11 men from the 80th Infantry Division attempted to advance through the field using standard mine detection equipment. The SCR-625 mine detector, a device that looked like a metal disc attached to a long pole, was supposed to emit a tone when it passed over buried metal. In theory, this would allow soldiers to locate and mark mines for later disposal. In practice, the device failed completely. The first man to die was Private Harold Benson from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was 22 years old. According to the after-action report filed by Lieutenant James Whitmore, Benson was sweeping the detector across the ground in careful arcs when he suddenly stepped on something. The witnesses reported hearing a soft click, then a brief hiss as the mine launched itself into the air. Benson had time to look down before the explosion tore through his midsection. 3 more men died trying to retrieve his body. The mines had been placed in overlapping patterns, each one positioned to catch anyone who rushed to help a fallen comrade. By the time the surviving soldiers managed to retreat, 7 men were dead, and 4 were critically wounded. The medical officer who examined the bodies, Captain Ernest Redhawk, wrote in his report that several of the deceased were unrecognizable due to the severity of their injuries. The 80th Infantry Division was paralyzed. They could not advance through the field without being slaughtered. They could not go around the field because German artillery had zeroed in on both flanking routes. And they could not wait because intelligence reports indicated that a German armored column was moving towards Saint-Avold from the east. If the Americans did not take the village within 48 hours, they would be caught between 2 enemy forces and annihilated. That night, in a farmhouse cellar that served as the temporary command post, Colonel William Patterson gathered his officers to discuss their options. The conversation was brief and grim. Every conventional approach had been considered and rejected. Mine-clearing tanks were unavailable. Artillery bombardment might detonate some mines, but would also alert the Germans to the upcoming assault. Sending more men with metal detectors was simply murder by another name. It was during this meeting that Captain Redhawk spoke up. "I have someone who might be able to help," he said. The other officers turned to look at him. Redhawk was respected, but somewhat mysterious. A member of the Cherokee Nation from Tahlequah, Oklahoma. He had joined the Army Medical Corps in 1941 and had served with distinction in North Africa and Italy before being transferred to the European theater. He rarely spoke about his background, but the men under his command whispered that he came from a family of medicine people, healers who possessed knowledge that went back centuries. "Who do you have in mind, Captain?" Colonel Patterson asked. Redhawk hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether to share something that might sound insane. "There is a man in the scout company," he said finally. "His name is Joseph Runningwater. He is Cherokee, like me. We grew up in the same town. His grandfather was a watchmaker who also served as a ceremonial drumkeeper for our people." Patterson frowned. "I failed to see how that qualifies him to walk through a minefield, Captain." "With respect, sir," Redhawk replied, "you have not seen what Joseph can do with sound." The meeting adjourned without a decision, but the next morning Colonel Patterson summoned Joseph Runningwater to the command post. The man who entered the cellar was not what Patterson had expected. Runningwater was 31 years old, lean and weathered, with black hair cut short beneath his helmet and dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He moved with an unusual stillness, each gesture economical and precise. He had been serving as a scout for the past 6 months, specializing in night reconnaissance and silent movement behind enemy lines. His record was impeccable, not a single mission failure. "Runningwater," Patterson said, "Captain Redhawk tells me you have a unique skill, something to do with sound and your grandfather." Joseph did not answer immediately. He looked at Redhawk, who nodded slightly. "My grandfather taught me to listen," Runningwater said. His voice was low and measured. He was a watchmaker in Tahlequah for 40 years. He could tell you what was wrong with a timepiece just by holding it to his ear, but he was also a keeper of drums for our ceremonies. He understood that everything in this world has a vibration, a frequency, even things that are hidden beneath the surface. Patterson leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing, soldier?" "I am proposing to find your minds, sir." The colonel studied him for a long moment. "And how do you intend to do that without getting yourself killed?" Runningwater reached into his jacket pocket and produced an object that seemed absurdly out of place in that blood-soaked cellar. It was a pocket watch, old brass-cased, with a simple white face and black numerals. The kind of watch a railroad conductor might have carried 50 years earlier. "This belonged to my grandfather," Runningwater said. "It still works perfectly. And when I hold it to the ground and wind it, the vibration travels through the soil. When that vibration reaches something hollow, something like a mine casing, the sound changes. I can hear it." Colonel Patterson stared at the watch, then at Runningwater, then at Redhawk. He looked like a man trying to decide whether he was dealing with a genius or a madman. "You are telling me," he said slowly, "that you can find buried mines by listening to a pocket watch. Not just any pocket watch, sir. This one is special. My grandfather modified it. He added a secondary spring that creates a specific resonance. When I tap the case in a certain rhythm, it produces a sound wave that penetrates the ground. I have done this before. I found unexploded ordnance on a farm in Tahlequah when I was 14. The Army Corps of Engineers had missed 3 shells that I located in 20 minutes. Patterson turned to Redhawk. "Is he telling the truth?" "Every word, sir. I was there when it happened." The silence in the cellar stretched out for nearly a minute. Outside, somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled like approaching thunder. Patterson thought about the 11 dead men in the field. He thought about the German armored column moving towards Saint-Avold. He thought about his own orders, which demanded that he take the village at any cost. Finally, he spoke. "Running Water, if you can find even half those mines, I will personally write to the War Department and recommend you for the Silver Star. But I need to understand exactly what you plan to do." Joseph nodded and pulled a small leather bundle from his other pocket. He unwrapped it carefully to reveal a thin wooden rod, about 12 inches long, polished smooth by years of handling. "This is a drum beater," he explained. "It belonged to my grandfather as well. He used it for ceremonies, but also for testing watch mechanisms. The wood comes from a red oak tree that was struck by lightning. My grandfather believed this gave it special properties for conducting sound. He set the drum beater on the table beside the pocket watch. "Here is what I will do," he continued. "I will enter the field before dawn, when the ground is coldest and the soil is most compact. Cold soil transmits vibration better than warm soil. I will move slowly, one step at a time. Before each step, I will kneel and place the watch against the ground. I will wind it 3 times and then tap the case with the drum beater in a specific pattern. Then I will listen." "Listen for what?" Patterson asked. "For the echo, sir. When the sound wave from the watch hits solid earth, it returns in a certain way. But when it hits a hollow space, like the casing of a mine, the echo is different, higher, sharper, like a drum with a crack in the skin. And you can really hear that difference?" Running Water smiled faintly. "Colonel, my grandfather could hear a broken gear in a watch from across a room. He spent 30 years teaching me to listen. By the time I was 10, I could hear a squirrel moving through leaves from 200 yards away. I once tracked a deer through a forest at night using only my ears. Yes, sir, I can hear the difference." Patterson exchanged a glance with his other officers. Their expressions ranged from skepticism to desperate hope. Finally, the colonel made his decision. "You have my permission to try," he said, "but you go alone. I will not risk more men on this unless you can prove it works." "Understood, sir." "One more thing," Patterson added. "If you find a mine, you mark it and move on. You do not attempt to disarm anything. Just find them and get out. We have engineers for the rest." Running Water nodded. He gathered his grandfather's watch and drum beater, wrapping them carefully in the leather bundle. As he turned to leave, he paused at the cellar stairs. "Colonel," he said quietly, "my grandfather had a saying. He told me that the earth speaks to those who know how to listen. The Germans think they have hidden their weapons where no one can find them. But nothing is truly hidden. Everything makes a sound if you know how to hear it." Then he climbed the stairs and disappeared into the grey November dawn. The night before the mission, Joseph Running Water did something that none of the other soldiers understood. He fasted. Beginning at sunset on November 10th, he consumed nothing but water. He spent the evening hours sitting alone in a ruined barn on the edge of the American encampment, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and deep. A few soldiers who passed by reported that he appeared to be meditating or praying. One man said he heard strange sounds coming from the barn, a low humming that seemed to vibrate in the chest, even from 20 yards away. What Running Water was actually doing was preparing his senses. His grandfather had taught him that the body was like an instrument. To hear clearly, you had to remove all interference. Food in the stomach created noise, internal gurgles and movements that could mask subtle sounds from the outside world. The humming was a vocal exercise, a way of calibrating the ears by producing a known tone and listening to how it reflected off surrounding surfaces. By midnight, Running Water felt ready. His hearing had sharpened to an almost painful degree. He could hear soldiers whispering in a foxhole 300 yards away. He could hear the distant creak of a German artillery piece being wheeled into position somewhere across the valley. And underneath all of it, he could hear something else, a faint, irregular pulse coming from the field where the mines were buried. It was the sound of death waiting. At 3:45 in the morning, Joseph Running Water crawled out of the barn and made his way to the forward observation post. Captain Redhawk was waiting for him, along with a young lieutenant named Thomas Blackwood, who had been assigned to observe the mission. "Are you certain about this?" Redhawk asked quietly. Running Water adjusted the leather bundle in his jacket. "As certain as I have ever been about anything." Blackwood looked nervous. "The Army does not officially recognize," he began. "Lieutenant," Running Water interrupted gently, "I'm not asking the Army to recognize anything. I'm asking you to let me walk into that field before the sun comes up and the Germans can see me. Whatever happens after that is between me and the Creator." They synchronized their watches. At exactly 400 hours, Joseph Running Water slipped over the American trench line and began crawling toward the minefield. The grass was cold and wet against his belly. The sky above was a uniform grey, with no moon visible through the overcast clouds. Perfect conditions. The darkness would hide him from enemy observers, and the cold ground would transmit sound with maximum clarity. He reached the edge of the minefield approximately 15 minutes later. He knew he had arrived because of what he did not hear. The normal sounds of the earth, the tiny movements of insects, the settling of soil, the faint creaking of grass roots, all of it stopped abruptly at an invisible boundary. It was as if the land itself knew that death was buried there and had gone silent in fear. Running Water paused, breathing slowly, letting his heart rate drop. Then he reached into his jacket and removed his grandfather's watch. The brass case was cold in his palm. He could feel the tick of the mechanism through the metal, a steady pulse that reminded him of a heartbeat. He positioned himself flat against the ground, pressing his ear to the soil, and wound the watch exactly 3 times. Then he began to tap. The rhythm was specific, a pattern of 5 beats that his grandfather had taught him decades ago. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 slow taps, the rhythm of a heart that is listening. With each tap, the watch produced a subtle vibration that traveled down through the case, through his fingers, and into the cold French earth. Running Water closed his eyes and listened. At first, he heard nothing unusual. The sound waves spread through the soil in all directions, bouncing off rocks, roots, and buried debris. It was like listening to a crowded room and trying to pick out a single conversation, but his grandfather had trained him for this. He filtered out the background noise, focusing only on the specific frequency that indicated a hollow space. And then he heard it, about 3 meters ahead and slightly to his left, a faint echo that was higher and sharper than the surrounding returns. The sound of metal containing empty space. The sound of a mine waiting to kill. Running Water reached into his pocket and removed a small wooden stake with a red cloth tied to the top. Moving with excruciating slowness, he crawled forward until he was within arm's reach of where he estimated the mine to be buried. He pushed the stake into the ground, marking the location. Then he retreated and began the process again. Tap, listen, mark, move. The sun had not yet risen when he found the 5th mine, then the 10th, then the 15th. Each one was buried at a slightly different depth, some only a few inches below the surface, others nearly a foot deep. The German engineers had done their work with terrible precision. The mines were arranged in a staggered pattern, designed to catch anyone who tried to zigzag through the field. But Running Water could hear them all. By the time the first grey light of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon, he had marked 32 mines. His body was exhausted from the cold and the intense concentration required for each probe. His hands were numb and his ears were ringing from the effort of listening to sounds that existed on the very edge of human perception. But he was not finished. He could sense that there were more. The echoes told him that the pattern extended further than he had mapped, perhaps all the way to the edge of the village. If he stopped now, men would still die. Running Water pressed his grandfather's watch to the ground once more and tapped out the rhythm. What he heard made his blood freeze. Not just one echo, not 2 or 3. a cascade of hollow sounds spreading out in every direction, layered on top of each other like whispers in a cathedral. The Germans had not just mined the field, they had created a death trap of overlapping kill zones, each mine positioned to trigger a chain reaction with its neighbors. And directly in the center of this nightmare, buried deeper than all the others, was something much larger. Running Water did not know what it was. A bomb, perhaps, or a central detonator designed to set off every mine simultaneously if the field was breached. Whatever it was, it pulsed with a low, heavy sound that seemed to press against his skull like a physical weight. He marked the location with a double stake and began to retreat. The sun was fully up by the time he crawled back into the American lines. His uniform was soaked with dew and mud. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling, but in his wake 40 red stakes protruded from the French earth, each one marking a place where death had been hiding. Lieutenant Blackwood was the first to reach him. "How many?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Running Water looked at him with exhausted eyes. 40 mines, he said, plus something else in the center, something big. Tell the colonel he needs to see this before anyone tries to cross. Blackwood stared at the field, at the seemingly random pattern of red stakes stretching into the distance. His skepticism had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked like awe. "How?" he asked. "How did you find them all?" Joseph Running Water smiled faintly and held up his grandfather's pocket watch. "I listened," he said simply. "The earth told me where they were." The news of what Running Water had accomplished spread through the American camp like wildfire. Within an hour, Colonel Patterson had personally inspected the marked minefield, accompanied by a team of Army engineers who were frankly astonished by what they saw. The stakes were positioned with remarkable precision. When the engineers carefully excavated the first few locations, they found German S-mines buried exactly where Running Water had indicated. Not one stake was misplaced, not one mine had been missed. But the true revelation came when they investigated the center of the field. Buried nearly 2 feet beneath the surface was something the engineers had never seen before. A cylindrical device, approximately 4 feet long and 18 inches in diameter, connected by wire to at least 12 surrounding mines. The lead engineer, Captain Marcus Thornton, spent nearly an hour examining it before he emerged from the field with a pale face and trembling hands. "It is a daisy chain," he told Colonel Patterson. "The Germans rigged the entire field to explode simultaneously. If anyone had triggered one of those outer mines, it would have set off the central device, which would have detonated everything else. We would have lost 50 men at least, maybe 100. Patterson looked at Running Water, who was standing nearby with a cup of coffee that he had not yet touched. "How did you know it was there?" "The sound was different," Running Water replied. "Deeper, heavier, like a drum made of iron instead of wood. My grandfather taught me to listen for that kind of resonance. It usually means something dangerous." Colonel Patterson was not a man given to displays of emotion. He had commanded men through some of the bloodiest fighting of the war, and had learned to keep his feelings locked away, where they could not interfere with his duty. But at that moment, standing at the edge of a minefield that should have been a mass grave, he felt something he had not experienced in a long time. "Hope, soldier," he said quietly. "You just saved more lives than you will ever know." The assault on Centervold commenced the following morning. Thanks to Running Water's work, the engineers were able to clear a safe path through the minefield in less than 6 hours. The American forces crossed without a single casualty and took the village by noon. The German defenders, caught off guard by the speed of the advance, retreated in disarray. But the story of Joseph Running Water and his grandfather's watch did not end there. In the weeks that followed, word of his abilities reached higher and higher levels of command. He was summoned to a series of meetings with intelligence officers who wanted to understand how his technique worked. He demonstrated it repeatedly, locating buried metal objects with what seemed like supernatural precision. Each time, he tried to explain that there was nothing mystical about it. just careful listening and an understanding of how sound moved through different materials. But the army was not interested in explanations that sounded like science. They were interested in results. By December of 1944, Joseph Runningwater had been assigned to a special unit tasked with locating hidden enemy positions throughout the European theatre. He found buried ammunition depots in Belgium. He discovered concealed artillery emplacements in Luxembourg. He even located a network of underground tunnels that the Germans were using to move troops behind American lines. And through it all, he carried his grandfather's pocket watch and drum beater, the only tools he ever needed. But there was something else happening, something that Runningwater mentioned only in private letters to his family back in Oklahoma, something that troubled him deeply. The more he listened to the earth, the more he heard things that he could not explain. Voices, not the voices of living men, something older, something that seemed to rise from the soil itself, speaking in languages he did not recognize. They whispered to him during his night missions, telling him secrets about the land he was walking on. They warned him of dangers that his technique should not have been able to detect, and sometimes, in the deepest hours of darkness, they seemed to be calling him somewhere, calling him home. But home was not Oklahoma. Home was somewhere beneath the ground. The winter of 1944 was one of the coldest in European memory. Snow fell continuously from mid-December through January, blanketing the countryside in white silence. The American forces pushed eastward through Belgium and Luxembourg, fighting the desperate German counter-offensive that would later be known as the Battle of the Bulge. And through it all, Joseph Runningwater continued his strange work. By this point, his reputation had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. Officers who had never met him spoke his name with a mixture of respect and unease. The enlisted men told stories about the Cherokee scout who could hear minds talking to each other beneath the frozen earth. Some said he had made a deal with spirits. Others claimed he was simply the best trained tracker the army had ever produced. A few whispered that he was something else entirely, something that had existed long before the war and would continue long after it ended. Runningwater paid no attention to the rumors. He was too busy listening. The voices had grown stronger since Saint-Avold. Every time he pressed his grandfather's watch to the ground and tapped out the sacred rhythm, he heard them more clearly. They spoke in fragments, broken phrases that seemed to drift up from impossible depths. Sometimes they sounded like Cherokee, the language of his childhood. Other times they spoke in tongues he had never encountered, ancient syllables that seemed to vibrate in the bones rather than the ears. And they always said the same thing: "Come deeper, come home. The truth is waiting." Runningwater told no one about these messages. He knew how it would sound. The army had no use for soldiers who heard voices from underground. They would send him to a psychiatric ward and take away his grandfather's watch, and then he would never learn what the voices were trying to tell him. So he kept listening, and the voices kept calling. The mission that changed everything came in the final week of January 1945. American intelligence had received reports of a German research facility hidden somewhere in the Hurtgen forest, a dense woodland along the German-Belgian border that had already claimed thousands of American lives. The facility was rumored to be developing some kind of new weapon, though the details were unclear. What was clear was that the Germans were protecting it with everything they had. Colonel Patterson, who had since been promoted to command a larger tactical unit, personally requested that Runningwater be attached to the reconnaissance team. The mission was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. Find the facility, map its defenses, report back without being detected. The team consisted of 12 men, including Runningwater and a young sergeant named William Crowfoot, another Native American soldier from the Lakota Nation who had heard stories about the Cherokee scout and specifically requested to serve alongside him. They set out on the night of January 23rd, moving through the frozen forest under a moonless sky. The Hurtgen was unlike any place Runningwater had ever experienced. The trees were ancient, Their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, as if something had been trying to spell out a message in wood and bark. The snow absorbed all sound, creating a silence so complete that it felt like pressure against the eardrums. And beneath that silence, Running Water could hear something else. The earth was screaming, not loudly, not in any way that the other soldiers could detect, but to Running Water's trained ears, the sound was unmistakable. A constant, low-frequency vibration that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once. It was the sound of pain, the sound of something buried deep underground that desperately wanted to be free. He stopped the team about 2 miles into the forest and knelt to press his grandfather's watch against the frozen ground. "What is it?" Crowfoot whispered. Running Water did not answer immediately. He was listening to something that made no sense. The vibrations coming from below were not random. They formed a pattern, a rhythm, and that rhythm was familiar. It was the same pattern his grandfather had taught him decades ago. 3 quick beats, a pause, then 2 slow beats. The rhythm of a heart that is listening. Someone down there was tapping back. Running Water felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. He had used his grandfather's technique hundreds of times. He had found mines, bombs, tunnels, and buried equipment, but he had never, not once, received a response. Until now. "We need to keep moving," he told the team, "but stay close. Something is wrong here." They continued through the forest, following a narrow trail that wound between the ancient trees. Running Water kept his grandfather's watch in his hand, tapping occasionally and listening for the response. Each time it came. 3 quick beats, a pause, 2 slow beats, getting closer, getting clearer. After another hour of careful movement, they reached the edge of a clearing. What they saw there would haunt every man present for the rest of their lives. The German facility was not what they had expected. There were no barracks, no guard towers, no fence or defensive perimeter. Instead, there was simply a massive hole in the ground. The opening was roughly circular, perhaps 60 feet in diameter, with edges that looked like they had been carved rather than excavated. Stone steps spiraled down into the darkness, disappearing into depths that seemed to go on forever. Around the opening, the Germans had constructed a series of wooden platforms and pulley systems, the kind used for lowering equipment into mines. But these platforms were old, ancient even. The wood was grey and cracked, as if it had been standing there for centuries rather than years. And there was something else, symbols. They were carved into the stone around the opening, hundreds of them, forming concentric circles that radiated outward like ripples in a pond. Running Water did not recognize most of them. They were not German. They were not any European script he had ever seen. But scattered among the foreign symbols were others that made his heart stop. Cherokee syllabary, the writing system created by Sequoyah in the 1820s. The sacred characters that Running Water had learned as a child in Oklahoma. They were here, carved into ancient stone in the middle of a German forest. Thousands of miles from the land where they had been invented, impossible, and yet there they were. Crowfoot saw them too. His face went pale in the dim light. "How?" he breathed. "How are those here?" Running Water shook his head slowly. He had no answer. The voices from underground were louder now, almost deafening in their intensity. They were calling to him specifically, using words he could finally understand. "Grandson, you have come at last. The circle is complete." He stepped forward, drawn toward the opening by a force he could not resist. The other soldiers called out warnings, told him to stop, to wait, to think. But Running Water was beyond thinking. He was listening, and what he heard was the truth he had been seeking his entire life. His grandfather's technique was not just a way to find buried objects. It was a key, a method of communication passed down through countless generations, from a time when humans and the earth spoke the same language. The pocket watch, the drum beater, the sacred rhythm, All of it was part of something much older than the Cherokee Nation, something older than any nation, and it had been waiting for him here, in this impossible place, since before history began. Running Water reached the edge of the opening and looked down. The stone steps descended into darkness for perhaps 50 feet before reaching a landing. Beyond the landing he could see the faint glow of artificial light, flickering and unsteady like torches or candles. And from that glow came sounds. Mechanical sounds, the whir of machinery and the clank of metal on metal, but underneath those sounds was something else, breathing, slow, deep, rhythmic, the breath of something massive that was sleeping far below the surface of the earth. "We need to report this," one of the soldiers said. His voice was shaking. "We need to get out of here and tell command what we found." Running Water knew the man was right. The smart thing, the military thing, would be to retreat and report. Let the generals decide what to do. Let someone else descend into that darkness and discover what was waiting below. But the voices would not let him leave. They whispered promises. They showed him visions. His grandfather, young and strong, standing beside the opening with a smile on his face. His ancestors, stretching back through time, each one carrying the same pocket watch, each one practicing the same rhythm. And beyond them, further back than human memory could reach, something else. Something that had taught the first people how to listen. "I am going down," Running Water said. The other soldiers protested. They argued. One of them, a corporal from Tennessee, actually grabbed his arm and tried to pull him back, but Running Water shook him off with surprising strength. "Stay here," he commanded. "If I am not back in 1 hour, return to base and tell them what you saw. Tell them the Germans found something that should have stayed buried, and tell them it is awake." Before anyone could stop him, he stepped onto the first stone stair and began to descend. The steps were worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. The stone was cold through Running Water's boots, and the air grew colder with each step he took. The light from above faded quickly, replaced by a darkness so complete that he could not see his own hand in front of his face. But he did not need to see. He could hear. The breathing was louder now, closer, and with each breath came a pulse of sound that travelled through the stone itself, vibrating up through Running Water's feet and into his bones. It was a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the earth, and it was welcoming him home. He reached the first landing after what felt like an eternity. The flickering light was coming from ahead, through a tunnel carved into the rock. The walls of the tunnel were covered with more symbols, including more Cherokee characters that spelled out words Running Water could read. Listen, remember, return. He followed the tunnel for approximately 200 yards, descending gradually all the while. The air was different down here, thick and humid despite the cold, filled with strange scents that reminded him of things he had not smelled since childhood. Cedar smoke, river clay, the particular sweetness of Oklahoma earth after a summer rain. And then he emerged into the chamber. It was vast, so vast that his mind struggled to comprehend it. The ceiling was lost in darkness somewhere far above, and the walls curved away on either side like the interior of some enormous cathedral. Torches burned in brackets along the walls, casting dancing shadows across the stone floor. And in the center of the chamber, surrounded by German soldiers and scientists who were working feverishly at banks of strange equipment, was something that should not have existed. A drum, but not an ordinary drum. This was a drum the size of a house, its surface made of stretched hide that looked ancient beyond measuring. The frame was carved from a single piece of wood, dark and dense, covered with the same symbols that decorated the tunnel walls. And the drum was making sound, not being played, making sound on its own. The vibrations Running Water had been hearing since he entered the forest were coming from this drum. It was humming at a frequency that seemed to exist on the edge of human perception, a continuous tone that resonated in the chest and made the teeth ache. And as Running Water watched, he realized that the German scientists were not studying the drum. They were trying to wake it up. The equipment they had brought down into the chamber was designed to amplify and direct sound. Massive speakers were positioned around the drum, connected by cables to banks of electrical equipment. The scientists were adjusting dials and throwing switches, trying different frequencies, different rhythms. They were searching for something, a code, a key. The same rhythm Running Water's grandfather had taught him. One of the German soldiers spotted him and shouted a warning. Weapons were raised, orders were barked in harsh, clipped German. But before anyone could fire, the drum spoke. Not in sound, in thought. Images flooded Running Water's mind. He saw the beginning of time, when the earth was young, and everything that lived upon it was connected by sound. He saw the first people emerging from underground, taught by beings older than humanity how to listen to the world around them. He saw the knowledge being passed down through generations, preserved in drums and rhythms and pocket watches that contained the echo of creation itself. And he saw what the Germans were trying to do. They had found the drum years ago, buried beneath the Hürtgen forest during an archaeological expedition in 1936. They did not understand what it was, but they recognized its power. The vibrations it produced could be felt for miles. They believed it was some kind of ancient weapon, a device that could generate earthquakes or disrupt enemy communications. They had spent years trying to activate it, to control it, to use it for their war. But the drum was not a weapon, it was a door. And if the Germans succeeded in opening it, something would come through. Running Water understood all of this in the space of a single heartbeat. He understood that his grandfather had known, that his entire lineage, stretching back to the very beginning, had been preparing for this moment. The drum keepers of the Cherokee Nation were not just ceremonial leaders. They were guardians, watchers, protectors of a secret that predated every civilization on Earth. And now it was his turn to protect it. He moved without thinking, drawing his service pistol and firing not at the German soldiers, but at the equipment. Sparks flew, cables snapped, scientists screamed and dove for cover. The soldiers returned fire, bullets whining past Running Water's head, but he was no longer entirely in control of his own body. Something else was guiding him, something that had been waiting thousands of years for this moment. He reached the drum and pressed his grandfather's pocket watch against its surface. The world went silent. Every sound stopped. The gunfire, the screaming, the hum of the equipment, even the breathing of the thing beneath the earth. Everything fell away, leaving only Running Water and the drum, connected by a pocket watch that suddenly felt warm in his hand. And then the drum spoke one final time. "Thank you, grandson. The door will remain closed, but you must carry the truth. You must remember what was almost lost." When sound returned, Running Water was no longer in the chamber. He was lying on the forest floor above, surrounded by the soldiers of his reconnaissance team. The sun was rising on the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the massive opening that had led down into the earth was gone. In its place was simply solid ground, covered with undisturbed snow, as if nothing had ever been there at all. The soldiers stared at him in confusion and fear. They demanded to know what had happened. They said he had stepped toward the opening and then simply vanished, disappearing into thin air for nearly 6 hours. When he reappeared, he was lying in a different location, 50 yards from where they had been waiting. Running Water could not explain. He was not sure he understood himself, but he still had his grandfather's pocket watch, and when he pressed it to his ear, he could hear something new mixed in with the familiar ticking of the mechanism. A heartbeat, slow, deep, patient, waiting. The official report filed by Colonel Patterson made no mention of underground chambers, ancient drums, or Cherokee symbols. It stated simply that the reconnaissance mission had been unsuccessful due to adverse weather conditions and that no German facility had been located in the designated search area. The men who had witnessed Running Water's disappearance were quietly transferred to other units and encouraged to forget what they had seen. Running Water himself was discharged from the army 2 months later, in March of 1945. The official reason was listed as combat fatigue. The unofficial reason was that he had become unreliable, prone to long silences and strange behaviors that made his commanding officers uncomfortable. He returned to Oklahoma in the summer of 1945, just weeks before the war in Europe ended. He went back to Tahlequah, to the house where he had grown up, to the workshop where his grandfather had repaired watches and kept the drums of his people. His grandfather had died while Joseph was overseas. The old man had passed quietly in his sleep on the same night that Joseph descended into the chamber beneath the Hurtgen forest. The timing, Joseph realized, was not a coincidence. Nothing in this story was a coincidence. In his grandfather's workshop, Joseph found a letter waiting for him. The envelope was old, yellowed with age, but it bore his name in his grandfather's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Grandson," the letter read, "if you are reading this, then you have heard the drum, you have touched the door, and you have kept it closed. I am proud of you. But your work is not finished. The drum beneath the forest is not the only one. There are others, hidden throughout the world, each one guarded by a people who remember the old ways. The Cherokee are not alone in this responsibility. We are part of a chain that stretches across all nations and all times. You have been given a gift, grandson, the ability to hear what others cannot. Use it wisely. There will be others who seek the drums, others who want to open the doors. You must find them before they succeed. And remember always that you are not alone. The earth speaks to those who know how to listen, and the Creator watches over all who walk in his path. I love you, grandson. I will see you again when the time is right." The letter was signed with his grandfather's name and a symbol that Joseph recognized. The Cherokee word for listen, written in syllabary. Joseph Running Water spent the rest of his life honoring his grandfather's instructions. He traveled the world, following whispers and rumors to remote locations where other drums might be hidden. He found evidence of similar sites in Peru, in Tibet, in the remote regions of Australia where the Aboriginal people spoke of something called the dream time. He met other guardians, keepers of other traditions, who recognized him as a brother in the ancient work of protection, and he continued to listen. The pocket watch never left his side. He wound it every morning and every night, using the same rhythm his grandfather had taught him. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he heard the heartbeat again, distant, patient, waiting for a time that might never come. Joseph Running Water died in 1987 at the age of 74. He passed away in his sleep in the same house where his grandfather had died, holding the same pocket watch in his hands. Those who found him said he looked peaceful, content, as if he had finally heard a sound he had been waiting his whole life to hear. But the story does not end with his death. In the decades since Joseph Running Water passed, there have been reports, strange reports from remote locations around the world. Unexplained vibrations detected by seismographs in places where there should be no geological activity. Ancient sites suddenly becoming focal points for unusual phenomena. And most troubling of all, persistent rumors of well-funded expeditions searching for something called the drums of the Watchers. The organizations behind these expeditions are never clearly identified. They operate through layers of shell companies and anonymous benefactors. But their methods are consistent. They send teams to remote locations with sophisticated sound equipment. They drill into the earth, searching for hollow spaces beneath the surface, and they employ specialists in ancient languages and indigenous traditions, people who might be able to decipher symbols that have been forgotten for millennia. They are looking for the doors. And if you listen carefully, very carefully, in the deep silence of the night, you might hear something that should not be possible. A rhythm coming from far beneath your feet. 3 quick beats, a pause, then 2 slow beats. The rhythm of a heart that is listening, waiting for someone to answer. The watches still exist. The drum beaters are still passed down from generation to generation. And somewhere in the world right now, there are people who know the old ways. People who can hear what others cannot. People who stand between humanity and something vast and patient that has been waiting since before history began. Are they winning? Are they losing? No one knows for certain. But if you find yourself in a quiet place, perhaps in a forest or a field or an ancient site that feels somehow wrong, pay attention to the ground beneath your feet. Put your ear to the earth. Listen with your whole being. And if you hear something tapping back, know that you are not alone. The watchers are still watching. The guardians are still guarding. And the door, for now, remains closed. Some people ask me, after they hear this story, what they should do with this knowledge. They want to know if they should be afraid, if they should prepare for something terrible, if they should believe that there are really ancient drums hidden beneath the earth, waiting for someone foolish enough to try opening them. My answer is always the same. I do not know if every detail of this story is true. I do not know if Joseph Running Water really heard voices from underground, or if the chamber beneath the Hurtgen forest actually existed. History is full of mysteries, and the human mind is capable of experiencing things that cannot be easily explained. But I do know this. There is a power in listening. There is a wisdom in paying attention to the world around us, to the quiet voices that speak beneath the noise of modern life. Our ancestors understood this. They built their lives around the rhythms of the earth, the cycles of the seasons, the heartbeat of creation itself. Somewhere along the way, we forgot how to listen. We filled our world with noise and distraction, drowning out the whispers that might have guided us towards something greater. Joseph Running Water never forgot. He carried his grandfather's teachings through a world war and beyond, using his gift to protect people who never knew they were in danger. He did not seek fame or recognition. He simply did what needed to be done, one heartbeat at a time. Perhaps that is the real lesson of this story. Not that there are drums beneath the earth or doors that should never be opened, but that each of us carries within us the ability to hear what truly matters, if only we take the time to listen. In these dark and confusing times, when it seems like the world is spinning out of control, I encourage you to find your own pocket watch, find your own rhythm, find the thing that connects you to something larger than yourself, whether that is family, tradition, faith, or simply the quiet voice of your own conscience. And most importantly, I encourage you to seek the light that never fails. The God who created the earth and everything in it is still speaking to those who listen. His Son, Jesus Christ, walked this world and showed us the path to eternal life. In him there is no darkness too deep, no door too terrible, no enemy too powerful. The watchers may guard the drums of the earth, but the Creator guards something far more precious, your soul. Turn to him. Listen to his voice. And you will find a peace that no darkness can ever destroy. Until next time, my friends, keep listening, keep believing, and remember that you are never, ever alone. The heartbeat continues, and so does the story. What happened in that forest in 1945 was real. The soldiers who witnessed it never spoke publicly, but their families passed down whispered accounts that persist to this day. If you search through military archives with enough patience, you will find documents that reference unexplained phenomena in the Hurtgen forest during the winter offensive. Pages that have been redacted, reports that were filed and then lost. Someone does not want this story to be known, but the earth remembers. The drums remember, and Joseph Running Water's pocket watch, wherever it is now, still keeps perfect time. 3 quick beats, a pause, 2 slow beats, the rhythm of a heart that is listening. Are you